recording of your second, what you could call your performance criteria in your learning outcome 2 unit. So we'll go on to look at personality this week. So if you remember, we looked at genetics last week, and I said that this week we're going to concentrate on theories of personality. So we did look at family studies, twin and adoption studies. We looked at how they compared, the genetics of maybe identical twins that had been separated at birth and how they both end up criminal, that sort of thing. So there was quite a lot of strengths for the genetic approach. There were some weaknesses too, and hopefully you have some kind of idea if you'd managed to do the task for OneNote last week. So this week we're going to recognise that there are particular personality theories and how they can affect criminal behaviour. So we'll be looking at the work of Hans Eysenck, and we will see how these personality tests that he came up to are quite effective in determining whether somebody may have criminal tendencies. So if we just start a way back in 1949 in William Sheldon, this was like quite a deterministic look at how a body shape can perhaps have an effect on whether you can become criminal. So, and he did look at the three different types of the ectomorph was the slim, thin build, and the endomorph was the fuller, rounder build, and sort of in between was the mesomorph, that he said this was a type more prone to criminality because the personality of that type of person makes them maybe slightly more aggressive, and if this is the case, they may have tendencies towards criminality. However, to be quite honest, there was a lot more going on in this. That you couldn't just look at somebody and say within seconds whether they were criminal or not. So what else was going on? Well, Hans Eysenck was a behaviourist, and he was more concerned with psychological research. So while Sheldon, studied again men in the 1940s and came up with his different types of probably personality compared in relation to their body type, Eysenck was looking at genetics as well in the twins, younger ages, maybe between the ages of 11 and 13. And he was more concerned with doing a biosocial, combining biological and individual social factors to come up with a all-round theory of criminal behaviour. So he believed that if you studied these twins, and you can come up with some strong evidence, just like we said last week when we were speaking about the genetics, that there was, and you compared the MZ and DZ twins, so this was non-identical and identical twins, it showed there was more likely to be criminal behaviour found in identical twins than there was non-identical. So he wanted to take this further and come up with this theory, this biosocial theory. And he came across what he called his personality traits. And the first three that he looked at was high extroversion. So if you were at that end of the scale, you were an extrovert. However, if you were at the other end of the scale, you would be an introvert. So there was the extroversion scale, that neuroticism was probably, not very stable at all. And the other end was low neuroticism would have equaled stability. So it kind of relates to the stability of the personality. So, they could be, if they're high in neuroticism, they'd be maybe anxious or depressed, even emotional, certainly. And then he added this third one, the psychotism, in the 1970s. And he found people high in this would be displaying aggression, antisocial behaviour, certainly. They may be egocentric, lacking empathy, certainly as well. So what he was doing was coming up with this. You can see it's upside down here, but it's a pen model. So it's P, E, and the N. It's out of place there slightly. And he said that if you've got certain levels of these three factors within your personality, then chances are you could be criminal. And I'm just going to stop here to say, please don't go ahead and then take one of the personality tests only to find out that you're high in one or two of them and think that you're going to be the next Ted Bundy. It doesn't work like that. There's got to be certain factors to be looked at. So if we look at them individually, we'll look at an extrovert versus an introvert. So you could see that an extrovert would maybe be outgoing, social, friendly. They would be the type that you would say would be the the centre of a party. It would get everybody going. Now, it's quite interesting to think that if they've got high extroversion, then they have low cortical arousal in the brain, right? And this is the same with the introverts. They would have high cortical arousal. Now, what that means basically is that it takes an awful lot of arousal to get the extrovert going. And these are the people that you would see perhaps, that doing the extreme sports like bungee jumping, paragliding, that sort of thing. It takes a lot for them to get aroused in their brain. However, the introverts the opposite. It doesn't take much. So they are the more quieter, keep themselves to themselves, and maybe quite withdrawn, that sort of personality. Then we go on to neuroticism versus the stability. And somebody with high levels of neuroticism, you'd be looking at somebody again being anxious or tense, certainly worried about what was going on. They would be the type that would be looking at all these things happening. They could be moody at times. Whereas if you're stable, which is the other end of the scale that he spoke about, the N scale, you'd be looking at maybe having a sense of well-being. You're emotionally stable. So you're an easygoing person, you're quite happy with life. So that was the second area. And thirdly, Isaac later looked at this third dimension, P. And high P scorers tended to be the ones that were cold, uncaring. They may just like to be in their own company. They cut a solitary figure. They may be aggressive. And he also said that there may be tendencies for you to be this personality trait to be genetically determined. So it could be that it's passed down. So high in psychotism, you totally egocentric. The world is all about you. You could be impulsive, or you could be the type that doesn't want to conform to society's norms, anything like that. And low psychotism is the tender-minded, that warm, caring person who's cooperative. They do everything right, that sort of thing. So I suppose that if you were to put the genders, each gender into one or the other here, you could see that mainly men might be connected with this high levels of psychotism. So Isaac did think to himself, it could be linked to testosterone levels, anything like that. So by looking at these three levels, it's quite a straightforward model. You can look into this a lot more, but if you think about it, you've got to think, then what levels of P, E, and N would score these scores? What would be most likely to lead to criminal behaviour, and why would it lead to these criminal behaviour? So here's your pen model. Now, often there are tests out there where if you answer all the questions, then you may end up being charted on here somewhere. So you might fall, into somewhere here, or everybody's different. Now, like I say, I don't want you panicking by doing any of these tests and thinking, oh, great, I'm high on the neurotic scale, I'm high on the extrovert scale, I must be criminal. It doesn't work like that. There are things, other things that come into it, because he did bring in the social environment as well eventually. And usually, you know, these kind of traits are quite evenly distributed between most people. Some may have extreme scores. But again, with any type of model like this, where you are answering questions to come to a decision about what mood you're in, it depends on the mood you're answering them in. So if you're in an off day, you will answer things differently than if you're having a good day. So while these are useful, you've got to remember that they have certain, what could I say? They've got limitations in telling you factual. However, I suppose if you did them over several times over a period of time and came back with the same result, then it might be that, that's your personality and that's it. So what did Isaac say about this? So he basically said that people are different, okay? They're different the way that their brains are made up. They're different in way that their central nervous system, it might react differently to various accounts of happenings, acts. If you think about it, you may have heard of somebody that you know who's been in a car crash, and when you ask them about it afterwards, they're very unlikely to tell you what happened. Oh, I can't remember. It just 1 minute I was on the road, next minute I wasn't. It hasn't really affected them. They get out of the car, they just brush themselves down, they maybe go into a car the next day and keep driving. These are people with high levels of extroversion. And the person who remembers everything in the car crash, like, oh, we were traveling at 62, then this car with such and such registration pulled out, made me brake, I flipped. They'll recount every detail, and then they may not be the type of person so willingly to get back into a car. These are the people with low levels there, so they would be your introverts. So everybody's different. However, his theory said that people who are high in the E, N, and P, or PEN, we'll keep calling it the PEN model, they are the ones that run a higher risk of offending. Basically, because it's harder for them to control, their impulses. So if they are high in both extroversion and neuroticism, the chances are they can be the ones who are found to be criminal, because they need the stimulation. Because remember, they've got low levels of cortical arousal, therefore they need more and more to actually get that sense of excitement. And there is a clip, I'm not sure if I've mentioned it to you guys before, but there is a clip where there's a wee boy, Cody, and I'll put the link up to the it's a documentary in several parts. It's on YouTube. And he was diagnosed basically at the age of about 5 as being a psychopath. And they found that his brain was wired differently. He needed high levels to excite him, so much so that he had killed a neighbourhood cat by throwing rocks in it. He killed his grandmother's little Yorkie dog that she had, and was excited to tell her when he next met her. And this is because he needed these more and more to stimulate this cortical arousal system. So it's quite interesting to see that different people need different levels. And they will probably run a higher risk of offending. Not that they will become offenders, but these are the ones that he said will run a higher risk of offending. And here is the scales. And now you can maybe look at that and see if you can judge whereabouts you would land on here. However, if you want to take the test, there's a link there. There'll also be more links on your which I think are still are now available. I don't think I have to open them. I think they're already open. So where do you lie? So not lie as in um, I did all my homework when you hadn't. I mean lie, where do you lie on the chart? So if you take that Eyes-Inc personality test, here's a few different ones. You know, there's one that I did, and once I started, I couldn't go back, but it had over 200 questions. Um, it was quite full on, the things they ask you. They also ask you the same kind of question in a different way, and it's not to trip you up. It's just to see if you are coming out with the same type of answers, to make it a little more not predictable, but certainly to make it a bit more sound. So it is measuring different, well, certainly two pervasive dimensions of personality, and it's interesting just to do. You may be asked a question that you've never thought of before, and that you go with your gut, go with your gut answer. That's often the one that should be more accurate. So, a very basic sort of one-note task, and that all that I'm asking you to do is to look at some kind of academic reading. I can post online links to things, which I will. However, to be a bit more self-directed, it would be great if you guys could maybe go onto the online library service we've got with NESCOL, or certainly look up if you've got any textbooks. So look for, you know, Isaac's personality theory. Bearing in mind that we are asked to look at one personality theory. If you don't think much of Isaac, it's very easy to read and to evaluate. However, if you would like to look into more, it's not saying that you must evaluate him, but certainly a personality theory you have to. So if you do this second OneNote task, then you will have the second part of your assessment done, and it's better to do it in 250 word chunks rather than just wait till the end and be faced with 1,000 words. So look for an academic reading. Obviously, you're not going to go into Wikipedia because you're better than that, and see if you can evaluate his personality theory. So remember what's good about it, what's not. You may want to take in other people's research that, you know, says differently or backs it up, anything like that, and I'll have a look at it in OneNote. Okay, that's this week's